Grace Godlasky. She is an attorney with CEDR HR Solutions, and she helps with HR and employment law, aka compliance officer. So the word compliance officer, it means that they are an attorney in that department. So I am going to let Grace take over. And then Grace, as you're going through your presentation, if there are any questions, I might just stop you along the way so that people can ask their questions, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to respond. And, you know, we'll open it up for questions at the end as well. So there will be plenty of opportunity.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, and I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you for having us today. So we're here today to talk about employee handbook policies and team management. And you might look at the title of this presentation and think it looks like I'm here to talk about parenting. But because handbook policies can be a little bit dry, we're going to put a fun little spin on this for this group. And we're going to compare management styles to some popular parenting styles and talk about handbook policies that fall into each category. And my goal for you is to walk away with some context on how you or those under you, because a lot of times as owners, you know, you're managing managers. So how you or those under you are managing, and some items to look at so you can protect your business and create really a better workplace, which is our ultimate goal. So I'll just briefly introduce myself. I don't want to spend too much time, but as Doctor said, I am an attorney with CEDR HR Solutions, and I have a big scary title, compliance officer, but really it just means that I do a lot of internal compliance. I do a lot of research, drafting policies, ensuring that our company is giving quality and accurate support to our members. We work in all 50 states, so that keeps us pretty busy. And importantly, I'm also a mom. So I have a 6-year-old little girl and a 2.5-year-old little boy. I just adore the idea for this group. And while preparing for this webinar, I said to Alicia, I wish there was a group like this for mommy lawyers. And I'm now happy to say that I've actually joined your sister group, Mommy Lawyers in Business, and really honored to be here today. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I want to just briefly introduce CEDR as a company. I know that your group has had a lot of other resources recently that go into more detail about what CEDR is and what we do. So I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version. We provide industry-specific employee handbooks and HR support services. So the handbook is really easy. Most people know what an employee handbook is, and we're going to talk about it more today. But, you know, a big part of our job is to also keep our handbooks up to date. And so personally, that's a lot of what I do day to day. When a state law changes, really reach out to our people and say, hey, you know, what you got from us last year isn't good anymore. You need to update it. You need to update it. And that happens really frequently. Then a second kind of tier of what we do is HR support. That's really near and dear to my heart because that's where I started at CEDR. And what that is a team of attorneys and HR professionals who will answer any HR question. And hopefully that little tidbit catches your attention because as owners, a lot of times you need to know whether what you're doing with an employee is legal and whether it's going to lead to any negative consequences for you. Or sometimes you simply want to brainstorm ideas for other ways to handle what's going on in your office. So at the end of the day, what we hope to do is both save you physical time. You know, you don't need to be out there researching laws and Googling if something has changed in your state, but also the mental load of just not staying up at night worrying if that person that you fired is going to come back and be able to bite you. Okay, so now I want to get into, now that we've talked a little bit about who all the players are on this webinar, you know, what I'd like to do is actually switch over to introducing parenting styles and getting into some substance. So why parenting styles? This actually is based on an article that I had written before learning about your group, and it just seemed to be a really natural fit. So where the idea comes from is that over time, our office structures can start to feel a little bit like family. And I know a lot of us can probably relate to that. You have an office culture, you have different personalities, you have a role that you play within your office structure. And while we're certainly not here to advocate that you're parenting your employees or anything like that, there is value in giving thought to how you manage and how you communicate your expectations for your team. And I have to give a big lawyer disclaimer to this, that we're not criticizing or endorsing any parenting or managing style. It's really like a mnemonic device that I wanted to use as a fun way to identify where we might be ourselves, and then think about how we can make adjustments to improve our policies. I also want to point out that your style in the workplace might not be the same as your style at home, and I'll get into that a little bit more, but hopefully this will be fun and memorable presentation, and I'm excited to go through these. So let's talk first about free range. We have our little chicken here on the slide. I think we may have all heard this term, but maybe not. Free range parenting is often portrayed kind of in entertainment as being really hands-off. And I always picture this like 1950s style, like children roaming free in the neighborhood, not a lot of adults around, like, you know, general, just kind of be back in time for dinner. You know, yes, you can borrow the knives, just bring them back, be sure I want those back. And in the workplace, it's not quite the same, but there are some parallels. This can be a manager who trusts their staff to get their work done with very little supervision. I know that I tend to be a free range type of manager. Some of the challenges I think that presents is that maybe you check in on a project and you think a project is 50% done, and you check in and it's only 10% done. Or you look at your attendance records from the past couple of months and you're like, wait, when did everyone start showing up to work 30 minutes late? You know, so it's definitely a two sides of the coin there. Okay, so our next little style that we're going to talk about is tiger. And I don't know if you guys have heard this term used out there, but sometimes it's summarized as like all work and no play. And of course, this is very much an oversimplification of these terms, but it's sort of that let's work really hard. And I see it sometimes in the workplace when oftentimes owners and managers are truly passionate about their work. They love what they do. They devote all of their time and energy to their work, and they want to see their employees do the same. So, you know, we can see this seep up a little bit, and you can sometimes get burnout with this style, but sometimes you can get really hardworking teams. So, okay, so helicopter. This one is, I think, recently made famous, or well, recently, so kind of early 2000s, the hovering parent, you know, the over-involved parent. And a criticism of this style is that sometimes, you know, kids who have helicopter parents don't have time to learn from their mistakes or learn from failure. And I often see this in the workplace as managers who have trouble delegating or sometimes have trouble letting people perform tasks without supervision. I actually am a helicopter mom, even though I'm like a free range manager in the workplace. And you know, you can be a combination of these styles. This isn't hard and fast science. Okay, so let's do the last one. This is the newest one. I actually didn't know about this term until last year. The lawnmower, or some people call this a bulldozer. I think it's a newer term in social science literature. So what this is they are known to clear all the obstacles out of the way before their kids have a chance to even encounter them. And this can be criticized for stunting critical thinking, resiliency, all of that. And in the workplace, I think this can often appear as a manager who overloads their own plate, right? They want to keep everything on their own plate, or they don't have a great training model, so don't know how to push things off of their plate. And that can often lead to burnout up at the top, at the management level. So now that we know what we're talking about with those terms, and I'm loving these messages from you guys, everybody's raising their hands and saying, I'm totally a tiger mom, or, oh, well, I'm free range in the workplace, I'm tiger in the workplace. So I just love that you're identifying with this already, because I know it was really something that resounded with me personally. Okay, so that's not all the fun we're going to have today, but I have to switch gears and actually talk about the policies. So we are going to talk about policies and how these styles creep into our policies, but how having the right kind of policy actually helps us find balance in our own management style. So where we're talking about policies, and when I'm talking about policies, I'm really talking about your employee handbook. And that is sort of your central document in your workplace where you're putting all of your rules, all of your expectations for your employees. And it's an often overlooked document. I mean, raise your hand if you have one of these that is collecting dust somewhere and you haven't opened it in months. I think that's a common, yeah, that's a common thing. So rather than collecting dust in the back of a drawer, at CEDR, we certainly believe that the purpose of a handbook should really be twofold, and this is super essential to our conversation today. It is, number one, something that you reference and it helps you run your office. It's a set of rules that you can say, oh, let me look that up. I'm going to apply these consistently. I use them, if not every day, I use them frequently. But then the second huge piece of your handbook is that it is litigation avoidance. I think one of the scariest parts of being a business owner is worrying that there's this constant responsibility on your shoulders to make sure that all the rules are followed, and if something goes wrong, it's on you. And so an employee handbook can help you head off issues before they start, because it shows that you know what the law is and that you are complying with that law. And it's there in black and white. It's down on paper. All right, so what we're looking for in a good handbook, and again, just kind of sweep that image of the dusty book out of your head, we really always look for it to be written by a professional. So many DIY handbooks have policies, I see them, that are just straight up illegal. And what happens there is it's evidence against you in the event that there's a problem. So you definitely want to make sure that it's not hurting you as a document. It needs to then go one step further and actually comply with laws at all levels. So we usually see some of these form handbooks, check the box of it's federal law is fine, but you want to actually look at federal, state, local laws, and that's something that we do. And then you really want it to be recently updated. I know I talked at the beginning about how a lot of my job is reaching out when things change. Employment laws ebb and flow, and we're certainly living in a time where there's a lot of change because it's political, it's trendy. If you have a handbook that's more than 3 years old, I can make a pretty good educated guess that there's something in there that's not accurate anymore, because that's how much this area of law has changed. And in some states, if you're in New Jersey, if you're in California, if you're in Illinois, if your handbook is even more than 6 months old, there's something in there that's not accurate. So you definitely want to be watching out for these things. Okay, so actually, I don't know, okay, here they come. Sorry, guys. So we're looking at what's in a good handbook. I had to appear. We can't cover all these policies today, and we're not even going to try, but I wanted to include this slide to show you sort of the breadth and the scope of the things that you want in your policies. And my favorite moments, and I'm going to kind of break out of presentation mode and just chat for a minute. My favorite moments in our Solution Center is when our members call us and they are kind of panicked. They think they have like this really difficult, horrendous question or situation. And I'll give you a few examples. Like, 2 of my employees are dating. What do I do? And it's really awesome to just say, you have a policy for that. You know, you're set. You're okay. Someone went out on leave unexpectedly, you know, and I don't know what to do next. You have a policy for that. Or my assistant told me she's pregnant and she doesn't want to take x-rays anymore for the rest of her pregnancy. That's a really common one that comes up in your industry. You have a policy for that. So what this book can do is save you from having to make these judgment calls all of the time, because that is exhausting. And when you've just got it down, you can apply the policy consistently, and you don't have to make it up as you go along. And that's a really beautiful thing. All right, so now we're going to narrow into what I'm going to talk about today. I know I really went quickly through these couple of slides, so if you guys have questions, feel free to jump in. And we're getting into a couple of heavier topics now. What we're going to do today is focus on 3 policy categories. We're going to focus on leaves of absence, so extended periods of time off. We're going to focus on anti-harassment, so preventing it and addressing it, and disciplinary procedures, so coaching and correcting. And these are pretty big, deep topics. They could actually each be their own webinar. So like I said before, feel free to ask questions if you have them. Leave of absence. A lot of people, when they think about leave of absence, they think about, well, I don't have 50 employees, so I'm not subject to the FMLA. I don't have to give a leave. Or, well, I don't have a policy, but I just give people time off when they ask for it. That's a really common thing that we hear. Typically, you want this policy regardless of your size, and it's important to have one that's customized for you. So if you are a free-range manager, you may have kind of this unwritten policy, or something that is like a case-by-case policy. So just I handle it as it comes up. I give people what they need. I'm not worried about it. I'm hands-off about this. And I will tell you, a story that goes along with this, because we have, as I said, I'm a free-range manager. I don't like to worry about details. But a lot of times this sounds like a call from someone who has an employee go out on maternity leave, and they never really asked for a return date. And they never really talked about expectations before they left, because they were just, hey, we're good. I trust you, you trust me. But then things get difficult once the person is gone. They don't know what to do. They're not sure how much time they can give and when they can start to say, hey, that's too much time. It really does make it difficult to manage. In a similar vein, a case-by-case is sometimes problematic, because what you're actually doing with that type of policy is stating on paper that you don't treat people equally. And interestingly, we have laws that apply to most employers that do require you to treat similarly situated employees similarly. And so even though case-by-case sounds like, oh, well, that's super fair, it can actually come back and bite you. So we'll talk about how to find a good balance on the next slide. But let's talk about the other side of the coin, the other end of the spectrum, where we get some tiger policies. And I see these sometimes too. Maybe there's no leave in the book and they just don't want people to take time off because being at work is important. And there's certainly value in a hardworking culture. But again, there are laws that do require us to accommodate a certain amount of time off when people do need it. Or one of the other things that I see really commonly is automatic termination language. So employers who give something like 6 weeks of leave, but then you want the person to be back right at the end of the 6 weeks. No extensions available. And I'll just kind of give an example. Oh, let's go back here. I'll give a quick example. What can happen with this is maybe somebody told you they'd be back the 15th of January, so today, but their doctor says they're really not cleared to come back till next Monday. Usually that wiggle room of a couple of days is going to be required by the laws that apply to you guys. And so we do recommend building some of that wiggle room into the policy. So if any of the things on this slide ring a bell, either you don't have a policy in place, you've got something that actually says case by case. You don't have, extension language, or you don't allow a leave, you definitely want to be thinking about and taking notes on the next slide, because what we're covering here is, what you do want to include. These are general points. We can't guess what states you're in and what localities you're in. So, of course, I have to caveat it with, we always would look at your size and your location. But what the good thing is you're going to see the same categories of things covered in most of the policies, regardless of what's required by your state. So what you definitely want to include is your potential length of leave. So is that 6-8 weeks? You want to have some option to extend for medical necessity. If somebody's doctor says, yes, they needed 6 weeks of leave, but they need an extra day or two, or they need to come back part-time for 1 week, usually that's going to be a good idea. You want to cover types of leave, and this is a balancing act because you don't want to be more broad than you're required to be under the law, but you also don't want to be too narrow. So most smaller employers require, leave or offer leave, for like maternity, paternity, and medical needs of the employee themselves. If you're larger and you're subject to a different law like the FMLA, you may have to offer leave for care of a family member. Like my husband has cancer, my child is sick, and they need to take time off for that. We definitely want to include a doctor's certification to say, yes, I actually need this leave. You want to include that they do have a right to reinstatement, so that I do get my job back at the end of this leave. And these are a few other details. I think these last few bullet points are often overlooked. So you want to talk about what happens with their time off. If you have paid vacation, if you have sick time, PTO, do they have to take it at the same time as their leave? Can they save it all up for when they get back? Can they use it to extend the leave? So these are all questions you want to have answered. Usually we suggest that it runs at the same time, but you do have some choice there. If you offer medical benefits or other insurance benefits like short-term disability, what happens with those benefits while the person is on leave? It's something that is really confusing, I think, for a lot of employers, because you don't administer leaves of absence every single day, usually, hopefully not. And so when these things come up, they come up really infrequently, and it's challenging to work through. We usually require a fitness for duty or a release when somebody comes back. And I talked about this before, but considering some part-time accommodations. So you can see for this type of policy, this is just a lot on one slide, but it's also a lot for one policy, and it's a lot of legwork. So getting this right is important, and certainly something to consider with what you have now and what you want going forward. All right, so that's a heavy topic, leave of absence is, and we're just going to switch right into a light, easy topic, which is harassment and discrimination. Just really easy, light stuff tonight, guys. Okay, so I know I'm tongue-in-cheek there, but harassment and discrimination, I mean, unless you have been completely ignoring all news and just everything that's been going on, you've probably heard about the Me Too movement. You've probably noticed a shift in some of the dialogue that's happening around workplaces in the last 2 years. So I think I pulled recent stats because it has been statistics from 2016 and 2015 aren't even relevant anymore when you're talking about harassment and discrimination. And the first bullet point here, I think, is incredible, that in 2018, there was more than a 50% increase in lawsuits challenging sexual harassment than in 2017. So, and these are statistics from the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and so they're kind of a gateway if you want to file certain types of lawsuits. So this is pretty accurate. This isn't like surveying people off the street. In that same category, there were over 84,000 discrimination charges filed, and the average settlement cost in these categories was almost $70,000. And I just want to point out, I don't love kind of numbers that make things sound bigger and scarier than they are, and that's certainly not the goal here. But I do want to point out, this is the cost of settlement, a settlement amount. That doesn't mean that anyone's done anything wrong. When you settle with an employee, it doesn't mean the employer's done anything wrong. It doesn't mean the employee's won. This is really just spending the money to a lot of times to make an issue go away. And this doesn't even account for attorney's fees or your lost production because you're dealing with this and you're not seeing patients, or other resources that are expended when you resolve these types of issues. So I can't even overstate this, that this is a really vocal, active area right now, and certainly in large part due to the recent Me Too movement, and then a large part due to just overall awareness in workplaces. We're seeing employees, the legislature, attorneys, they're all motivated in this area. Okay, so how can you assure that you don't have an issue to begin with? And let's kind of switch gears then and talk about what is harassment and discrimination in the workplace, and then how it can pop up. And especially, we're a mommy dentist group, right? And so we don't really fit a stereotypical, when you think about harassment and discrimination, it's very stereotypically a male supervisor, a female subordinate, and that's probably not a demographic that's showing up in your workplaces if you are, the owners, but it still can. So I want to get into that a little bit. Before I advance this, though, I do want to just quickly define harassment and discrimination in the workplace, because I think a lot of people have some misconceptions in that area. So at its very core, it is treating someone differently based on their membership in a protected class. So I'm treating you differently because you're female. I'm treating you differently because you're male, because you're pregnant, because you're over 40, because of your immigration status. I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but sometimes people like to say, I'm experiencing a hostile work environment, or I'm being harassed in the workplace, and you say, well, what's going on? Well, she eats tuna salad every day. She knows I don't like tuna salad. It just stinks at my workplace, and that's harassing. And that just doesn't fit, it doesn't fit into this category of what we're talking about, but you still hear that. She gives me the stink eye every morning. She never gets me coffee, and she gets this other person coffee. So all of these things, usually you see a lot of the word harassment or discrimination. I think that I want to pick up just about why harassment is tricky, and it's mainly because protected categories are not always intuitive. We're generally familiar with race, religion, gender, age, disability, but in some states, being overweight is a protected category. And in other states, it's not just being over 40, kind of being old as being protected, but actually being young. And so it's really being familiar with the spectrum and to know what you're looking for. The other thing that is really interesting and recent is that you as an owner can actually also be liable for things that don't even happen in your workplace. And that is because this is the age of the group text or the email or the meme, the after work happy hour. And it's really important to have a policy that is modernized to address the fact that your employees can communicate to you about everything that's going on in this area. All right, so we've kind of covered, hey, if you're in these realms of management style, what might your policy look like, or what might your expectations be? So now we're going to talk about how to find balance. So it's not that it's not okay to be in either of those categories, but it's more just to know where you're starting from, so that you can look for the things that might pop up. So here's a funny or not so funny story from our Solution Center. December 2018 in our Solution Center was the month of the inappropriate text message. Sexting, inappropriate memes, all of that was happening. And I think we're going to start to see more of that, because this is, the way that people are communicating with each other, and it's very interesting to see it in the workplace. So when you have those situations arise in your workplace, when somebody says, my supervisor sent a photo of his private parts to my assistant. We want you to be able to open your handbook and say, here's our procedure for that. And here's what your procedure should look like on this slide. What you want to have is clear statement of anti-discrimination that covers all protected categories. You're going to want to have an anti-retaliation policy that says, hey, if you bring something up, whether it's tuna salad or whether it's a sext that you didn't want to receive, you won't be fired for raising that concern. We're going to take you seriously. So it's sort of that whistleblower concept, just applied in the private realm. You want a complaint procedure, so you want a mechanism for people to be able to bring these items to you, and then an open door to multiple managers. And the reason is if you have a concern about, let's say, your team lead, and you're required to report that to your team lead, that's not going to be super effective, and it's not going to fly with a judge or the EEOC. So we want to look at that. And then you want to include third-party actions. And what I mean by third-party actions are harassment by a patient, harassment by your delivery person or your IT person, people that don't even work for you. And you certainly want to have that covered. So I know we talked about those discrimination lawsuit statistics and how scary those were at the beginning, and we could actually do a whole webinar about preventing discrimination. But I think what we want to do is just look at this list on this slide and ask ourselves, do I do these things, or do I know how to do these things if this came up in my workplace? So I want to use that patient harassment as a demonstration instead of just talking abstractly about these bullets. So let's just say you have Mr. Jones. He's a longtime patient. He comes in for treatment and he's handsy, he's flirty, he makes inappropriate comments to your assistant. So what you want to know is if you have a handbook signed with a great policy, because what that is in a situation like Mr. Jones, what it's going to tell your employee is that they need to tell you about Mr. Jones. And if they choose not to tell you about Mr. Jones, some of the onus is on that person who's choosing not to report it. So it is both a sword and a shield. Training your managers, what we mean are especially middle managers like a team lead. They can raise some of the riskiest situations because if they're not trained properly, they don't know when to escalate an issue. So with Mr. Jones, they might say, oh, that's just Mr. Jones. He's been like that forever. Don't worry about it, right? And that's going to raise risk for you. You want a middle manager who knows that they need to say, okay, let's handle this the correct way. You want an investigation procedure, so you want to look at, did Mr. Jones just talk to this one person, or have they been talking to people over the last 5 years that we've been seeing him? Are multiple people involved? Of course, you want to document, and then finally take reasonable remedial actions. And I think that's a little bit of a mouthful. What is a reasonable remedial action? So for Mr. Jones, maybe that means he doesn't come in as a patient anymore. If this is a widespread issue and you just feel like you can't remedy it, maybe you don't see him anymore. If it seems like a pretty isolated thing, maybe that means that Mr. Jones just sees, someone else for the foreseeable future. So we want to empower you guys to have policies that you can follow every single time, even if you know the outcome. So I just want to jump back to my tuna salad example, because a lot of the times you get these concerns and it's not a Mr. Jones concern. It's not something that is serious, or it's not something that you feel would warrant a full-on investigation. But if somebody is saying, I feel this way in the workplace, I am having trouble in the workplace, even if you think you know the outcome, even if you know the tuna salad situation is not valid, you want policies that you can get out, you can reference, and you can say that you've done something consistent for every single person regardless of the concern. All right, so I know I'm running a little bit behind because of my little technical issue, so I'm going to try to sort of fly through this, and if you guys have questions, please speak up. So this last one is our disciplinary procedure. You can also call this coaching, but it's when you have to speak with your employees about a problem, like performance issues, attendance issues, not following your policies. Because this comes up pretty frequently, so the first two categories of things that we talked about, they might come up hopefully never, But for something like leave, it might come up fairly infrequently for you guys. But for a disciplinary procedure, this might be something that you're doing at some level fairly consistently. And it's not as easy as it sounds. So what I want to look at is what would our management styles kind of do as a default, and then how to get to the middle a little bit. So if you're free range, I think a lot of times is what happens is you don't like to give feedback, or you won't give feedback until it's too late. Like, that project's only 10% done. It was supposed to be done by now. You're fired. Tiger, what you might do is give a corrective action only after one violation. So offering very little, wiggle room there. If you're helicopter, what you might do is correct before the mistake is even made. So you're there, don't do it like that, and people don't get a chance to learn from their mistakes. And if you're lawnmower, what you might do is after one person makes a mistake, you might say, I'll just do it from here on out. So you take away the duty after one time. So how can you find some balance? I know we all kind of veer towards these things. And this area is one of the most difficult areas of any manager's job. How to go to someone and say, I don't like the way you're doing something. I wish you would do something differently. You're not following my policy or my procedure. What we suggest is a flexible structure for managing your employees, but it is still a structure. It's just got a little bit of bend in it. And so I'm going to use attendance as a quick example, and then we'll wrap it up here. So let's use somebody who is repeatedly tardy. What we want to do is have some flexibility that someone who's repeatedly 2 minutes late, it's 2 minutes. It's still late, but it's 2 minutes. You might want to give them a few verbal warnings first versus someone who's like a no-call, no-show. You don't know where they are. You don't know when they're going to be in. That person might get a written warning right away. The second thing here is that you want to create employee buy-in. So it might sound something like, hey, I want you to come up with 3 things you're going to do differently so that you're at work on time. Are you going to set an earlier alarm? Are you going to pack your lunch in the morning? Are you going to make coffee at the office rather than going through the Starbucks drive-thru? Getting the employee to contribute to the solution is a really great way to weave that into your feedback and to actually see change. Written warnings, I think for a lot of people, myself included, feel a little bit awkward. Like, I never give you another piece of paper and I'm just going to slide this form right across the table. So a lot of the times what you want to do is explain why what you're saying needs to be in writing. So that might sound a lot like, hey, because this is way outside of our normal allowances, I feel it's important enough to write this down for you so that we're both on the same page. And that sounds really different from just, here's your form, sign it. And that can be uncomfortable regardless of your management style. Okay, and giving an opportunity to respond, really can allow the conversation to evolve. So it allows the employee to say to you, hey, I've actually been late these last couple weeks because I'm experiencing morning sickness due to pregnancy. That's a whole different conversation than, hey, I've been late because I've been going through the Starbucks drive-thru every morning. So it does allow you to have a more constructive conversation if you're not just kind of giving the feedback and running away because you don't want to have the conversation. And then the flexibility I mentioned earlier, you want the opportunity to jump right to termination or to take a million steps in between if you need to. So a lot of people have like a 3 strikes you're out type of policy, or you get, verbal, written, final, written, suspension, and then you get a final opportunity to improve and then you're terminated. If it's too strict like that, it really ties your hands as a manager and takes away some of your discretion. So that's what we mean by a flexible structure. You want some bend in the structure, but it still is a structure. So I'm just going to do one last quick example and open it up for questions. What I have found, and especially recently, hearing a lot from managers that the conversations that maybe they were having with people 10 years ago have needed to evolve to address the evolving workplace. And so what we're talking about is how you're delivering feedback, and that can really vary based on management style, and that's what we're really focusing here on. But here's a coaching conversation that is likely to backfire. And I want to do an example with an assistant who can't remember how to set up your trays. So you've been employed for 6 months, you still cannot set up my trays correctly. I hired you to be able to assist me, and you're currently not able to do that. If you can't set up my trays correctly going forward, you'll be terminated, right? I think that person is going to probably get defensive. It doesn't explain the reasoning behind why the conversation is happening. And so these conversations can evolve into something that is a little bit more constructive, really looking at what we're looking for on the left side of the slide here. And so here's that same conversation morphed a little bit. So we're meeting today because this week you've not had the proper setup for my trays for at least 3 procedures. You know, it's important that our trays are set up accurately each time so we can be efficient and productive, meet the high standard of patient care we promise to our patients. So you're explaining your reasoning, you're walking them through it, and you're going to get some buy-in here. So please take some time now to review our procedures. If you have questions now, ask me. I'd suggest you create a checklist for yourself, but I'm open to other suggestions that you feel might help you improve. If a checklist isn't that, if you need a photo guide, you come up with a solution and you implement it. And I know if you focus and review our expectations that you can improve. And if I'm not seeing improvement, then we're going to have another conversation like this. So that's what the conversation can evolve into. And you can probably see how much more powerful and how much more engaging and effective that's going to be for your staff. So I'm going to wrap this up now, and I hope that the last point really demonstrates how important it is to have policies that back up the management style that works for you. So if you trend towards any of those fun little cartoon management styles that we talked about at the beginning, you know, the idea isn't to, oh, you know, we can't do that anymore, but it's more to say, what do I need, you know, on paper to support me, and how can I get that? Okay, so we've talked enough there about what CEDR's done earlier, and I did want to just allow, I know I wanted to allow 15 minutes at the end for questions, but we're still okay. We got 10 minutes at the end for questions. And before we get into questions, I did want to just mention, and Doctor, you might be mentioning this as well, CEDR does have a special offer for MDIB members on your offer page. I didn't want to repeat it here, so you guys know where that's located and you guys can look for that. It's just for you, and if you want to look at that after, that's fine. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Anyone? Well, I think I'm going to ask. Oh, Kim says thank you.
Yeah, thanks for attending.
I just remember reading something in our group. A doctor who owns a business, wrote that one of her dental assistants is pregnant and does not want to work with nitrous oxide. And that has thrown a wrench in her schedule because she has a smaller office and not that many, you know, people there working. And she's like, well, now I have to rearrange my whole schedule. I don't know how to address that. What would be, like, what would actually be in your handbook to address that?
Yeah, so the policy, and this is just best practices, it's a double-edged sword with someone who's pregnant and doesn't want to work with nitrous or x-rays. That's a really, really common question. And so we see things on both ends of the spectrum. The one end is the instinct to immediately remove that duty. Like, we want to keep you safe. We don't want you feeling uncomfortable at all. You're not doing that anymore. And so I'll talk about the problems with that in a second. And then the other end of the spectrum is how this doctor was feeling, which is, this is super inconvenient for me. You know, I don't know that I can accommodate not having you do this. And the first thing is to kind of pump the brakes and let the employees tell you exactly what it is that they're asking for, and to not make assumptions about exactly what it is that they want. So usually we would say, okay, I hear you that you're wanting to do something different. If they say nothing, like they just want to keep on doing their job, then that's fine. We don't usually recommend yanking a duty away because that actually is discrimination based on pregnancy, that you're taking something away. So we would recommend letting the employee tell you, do you want to just be out of the room? You know, are you wanting to not see these patients at all? You know, because the request can really vary. And then you could say, okay, let's get something in writing from your doctor saying what it is or what it isn't is not that you're allowed to do. You know, what exactly are you and are you not allowed to do? So you get a third party. So you're not making medical decisions on behalf of your employee. So get a third party to say they just need to be out of the room, or they can't be around at all. And then you go from there. And what the law is that you have to provide reasonable accommodations. But reasonable kind of means everything and nothing under the law. But usually what we find is unless they're, you know, your only person, like your only assistant, you usually do have to try to accommodate that sort of request, unless it would be so burdensome that you really had to hire a completely other person, or unless you wouldn't be able to see patients at all, you know, like if they were your only assistant. So it's a little bit of bad news in that you do have to usually eventually make that accommodation. But the good news is there's some verification and there are some steps along the way so that you can remain in control as an employer and have clear communication about what they need.
Great. Another question that I thought was interesting in our group was that a lot of doctors are afraid to fire or terminate people because of retaliation, or they have to pay the, the employee then signs up for unemployment benefits. What exactly is the doctor responsible for? Like, let's say the Department of Labor and Unemployment grants the employee the unemployment benefits. Then what happens? Like, what kind of fees or what kind of things does the doctor have to pay? And then that's part one of the question. And part two of the question is, when you let someone go, can you give them a paper and slide it across the table and be like, hey, I'll pay you $1,000 to leave me alone. And here, you can't do any social media retaliation. You can't post anything on Yelp. You can't post anything on Google. And you can't sign up for unemployment benefits. And you kind of like pay them to go away.
Got it. Okay. So I'll answer part two first because I think it's a little easier to answer, and then I'll answer part one. So the question of, can you give the employee some form of compensation to go away, meaning they're not going to apply for unemployment and they're not going to give you bad reviews or anything like that? And the short answer is no, you can't. You can't actually have anybody sign something that waives their legal rights, right? So even if you had them sign that paper and even if you gave them that money, it wouldn't be enforceable. Everybody has the right to apply for unemployment at any time. Actually, even though I have a job, I can go apply for unemployment. It doesn't mean I'm going to get it, but no one can have me waive that right. And so, you know, that is, we would typically not recommend ever including something like that in a termination letter, as it's not going to be enforceable, but it also would just increase risk. If you want to give compensation to make the relationship end a little bit more smoothly, like pay in lieu of notice, like, hey, we're firing you today, but we understand this is unexpected, and so here's a week's pay because we haven't given you notice. We understand you want to get back on your feet. That can help smooth things over, but it doesn't change anybody's legal right or legal status. But then the first part of your question is, what am I liable for and what does unemployment really mean? And that's a really frequently asked question, and I can try to summarize here. I think the most common misconception is if somebody gets unemployment from you that you're like writing them checks or that you owe them money. And that's usually not how it shakes down. So I'll just let you know that, you have your employer tax rating, you pay your taxes. for unemployment. And the more people that collect unemployment for you, the higher your tax rate will go. And so you may see an increase, in the next, tax round, whenever you pay into that fund, because someone collected from you, but it's going to be usually proportionate to what, if you had 10 people collect from you, you might see a bigger increase than if you had one person collect from you. And so there's no formula. Unfortunately, a lot of states don't really publish exactly what it will be, so you don't know what it's going to be, but that's the type of financial consequence that you can expect, is just a taxable consequence. Then in terms of if someone can collect or not, it's a pretty employee-friendly system, and the rule of thumb is that usually someone can collect unemployment with very narrow exceptions. It's usually if they do resign, they are usually not going to be able to collect. And then if you've terminated them for something called misconduct, and that's defined differently in every state. Every state has a statute that defines what would exclude you from unemployment. The best way to fight unemployment, though, is to do that corrective coaching that we talked about, number 3 in this presentation, and to document why you're letting them go. So if that person who was, tardy and repeatedly tardy, and you talked to them about being tardy, they knew what your policy was, and they violated it, and you gave them 3 written warnings before terminating them, it's not a guarantee that they're not going to get unemployment, but that's as good as you can do as an employer, to document and show we had a policy, they violated it, they knew they were violating it, this equals misconduct, and therefore they shouldn't be collecting unemployment. And that's as you're giving yourself as good of a chance as possible. We can never guarantee that someone won't collect, but those are the situations where you see that they won't.
Okay, because I had something that just recently happened, literally right before Christmas, and I just thought it was a very odd situation. In 10 years of practicing, I've never had to really fire anyone or let anyone go. So this was kind of an employee of mine submitted her resignation letter. And she gave me her resignation letter, and we've had multiple performance reviews, documented everything. And the way it worked was that she had given me a vacation form, almost a year ago, planning this year's vacation. And so she was leaving for her holiday, her vacation, within a week. And so her resignation, the 2-week resignation, would have landed while she was on vacation. And so I then, a day early, day and a half before she was supposed to go on vacation, I just let her go. And I said, well, since you are leaving anyway, I don't need you anymore, and you're going on vacation.
Right.
And I have all this documented. I get a letter from the, government or department saying that she signed up for collecting unemployment, except that she even signed up before I even let her go. The dates were the dates were she applied online 3 days before I even let her go. She only submitted a resignation letter. Long story short, I submitted all my paperwork. She's still collecting unemployment. And because I told her to leave before the 2 weeks was over, but she wouldn't even be in the office because she was on vacation. But I paid out all the vacation and paid out all her sick leave.
Yeah, it is definitely an odd situation. Unemployment is an employee-friendly system, so you see really bizarre things. I once saw somebody who just didn't return from maternity leave. It was their choice to resign. They had been gone, and they collected unemployment. So you do see things like that, and it varies from state to state. So California is very employee-friendly with unemployment. Texas can be fairly employee friendly with unemployment. I think some other states are not quite that friendly. The best thing that you can do in that sort of situation is just fill out the paperwork honestly. You know, you get those forms from the state and you check the boxes. Did they resign? What are the dates that they were employed? And then document. You know, if you perhaps had, you know, something like a confirmation of resignation letter saying, we got your resignation. It sounds like you had some documentation that was pretty solid and they just went her way anyway. And that there's not a whole lot you can do about it in a situation like that. And in that case, it does become like the cost of doing business, because you're going to see maybe an increase in tax. But, you know, if that person, you know, I'm not sure how you felt about her leaving, but if it wasn't any love lost, maybe that's a little bit of money well spent. So it doesn't always make total sense in that system, and it can be frustrating, but documenting and being responsive and honest on those forms is the best that you can do.
Right. There's another question from Dr. Susan, and she says, she asks, what is the best way to deal with suspected drug use or impairment at work? A receptionist who works well at times and then seems to be impaired at times, distracted, scattered, goes frequently to the ladies' room. Other staff suspects, but no real evidence. As a receptionist, she can kind of function in her impaired state. What can be grounds for termination? A terminated, quote, just not a good fit, end quote, but she worked for a year before this started. As an aside, we also have restaurants and suspect many of our team to be used, but we just hope they are on the right dose of their drug of choice to get through their shifts.
Right. Yes, different employee pool for sure, and I love that you added that. We could have a whole conversation about best practices for suspected drug impairment, and I'm going to try to summarize it if I can. So you have different categories of how you can address suspected drug use. And a lot of people fall prey to the trap of, well, we'll just do like a random drug test and everybody's going to get tested randomly. But if it's because you suspect one person, or maybe in the restaurant, a few people of using, it's really not random. And so unless you have like a third party conducting, you know, regular random tests, and usually you don't unless you're like a big warehouse or a very, very large employer. You know, the military is really good at doing those very systematic random drug tests. Unless you're doing something like that, you have got to do it in a few different set periods of time, and you want a policy. We do provide a policy that covers this. So usually it's at hire, which this situation doesn't fall into that category, or when you have a reasonable suspected use, and we'll get into that in a second, when somebody returns from leave, or if you find like, you know, you find them, you kind of catch them in the act, and you find the paraphernalia, or you find, you know, a different reason to look into that. So this fits into category number 2, which is you see some symptoms. And what you have to do in those situations is do a reasonable suspicion test, document the symptoms that you're seeing, and be as objective as possible, and have somebody else who's in a management position document what you're seeing too. So I'll use cocaine as our example, because that can be easy. So if you're seeing, you know, they're sniffing a lot, you know, they're talking really fast, and they just seem to be agitated, you know, they are frequently going to the restroom, and you see, you know, the eyes, I believe it's pinpoint, right? But anyway, so you're seeing those symptoms. You want to write all of that down, and as specifically as possible, and then you want to go to the person. A lot of people tend to want to send the person who they believe is impaired. They want to like just send them home for the day so they don't have to deal with it. But if you're doing a reasonable suspicion test, you actually want to say, hey, this is what we're seeing, and we're concerned about X, Y, or Z. We want you to go, you know, and we're going to send you to a lot of like urgent cares or local drug test centers will do a test for you. So you send them somewhere, obviously have someone else drive them, or get them a car. You don't want to send someone who's impaired, you know, to go get tested. You do a test and you get the results, and you make an employment decision based on those results. Now, if you don't have that real evidence, so from Dr. Susan's questions here, it seems like maybe you're not seeing symptoms that are that extreme. then you want to be really careful. And you can talk to her maybe just more generally and say, hey, this is what we're noticing. Sometimes you feel great. Sometimes it's really, sometimes you seem great. Sometimes you seem really scattered. Is everything okay? And just open it up for a conversation if you're not seeing those really objective things where you think you can send them for a test in the moment. So, we could have a longer conversation, and I would have some follow-up questions about where are you located? Do you have medicinal or recreational marijuana in your state? What exactly do you suspect? And so I would have follow-up questions before giving like a specific answer. But that is the process, and the process isn't really going to change pretty much regardless. It does, shift a little bit based on size and maybe location, but that's going to be your process for that. And you would want somebody, hopefully, CEDR advisors, we would walk you through that and can certainly, a lot of the times when someone's impaired in the office, I always giggle because it sounds like the manager is calling from a closet, like, they're here now, and I think they're drunk, I can smell the alcohol, but I just don't know, is it hungover? They're very urgent calls when those happen. And I get it. It is stressful. You don't want to make the wrong call. You don't want to accuse someone of something that they haven't done. And so we have seen it all in the Solution Center, and we can certainly give you the best guidance and have seen a variety of issues everywhere and can say, hey, this is what this looks like. Here's what I would do if I were in your shoes. And it can be helpful to have that second opinion.
Oh, well, I was going to say, just get a breathalyzer in your office.
There you go. You could do that. That's an easy way to take care of that.
Well, thank you so much, Grace. I know I don't want to go over time, and it was really informational and helpful. So thank you so much for spending the hour with us. And if anybody else has any questions, I think we can reach out to you, right, Grace?
Correct. So you want to look at this email here, the info@CEDR Solutions. Of course, you can call or go to our website, but info@CEDR Solutions. If you guys had specific questions about things that are going on in your office, but you just didn't really want to submit them to the group for a live answer, I know employee issues can be really sensitive sometimes. You can email and just say, I attended the webinar, here are my questions, and we will answer them on an individual basis.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much again. And ladies, thank you guys for joining us, everyone at home, all the doctors. I hope that this was really informational. And have a great night, and we'll catch you later. Thanks, Grace.
Thank you all.